You ready? Yeah. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Teaching Heroes, the video podcast where I ask teachers the critical question: what does it take to show up every day to teach tomorrow's leaders? And in the COVID-19 pandemic, wow, no other profession, I think, where people saw the full value is with the teaching profession. And in Australia, it was huge for us. But in countries like America, England, teachers really, wow, they showed up. And so I'm so privileged to have a very special guest on this episode today, Holland Hamilton, who is joining us all the way from Massachusetts, United States of America. Holland, thank you so much for coming on the episode.
Yeah, thank you. It's so lovely to see you. I have not seen you in person in a very long time, but it's good.
I met Holland in July 2019 when both Holland and I are members of a theatre, movement theatre practice called Playback Theatre. And I went to New York in July 2019 to do a course with the founders of Playback Theatre and met the amazing Holland there, and we realised we were both teachers.
We'll always find each other. Teachers will always find each other.
Yes. So when so Holland and I have stayed connected, and then I was thinking about the podcast. I thought, well, it'd be really great to hear what it was like for teachers in countries, not Australia. Some experience of lockdown, but nothing like this. And so look, my phone's going off. Just turned it off. When I come into work to record this podcast, it's like, Anyway, Holland, tell us about yourself. Why did you become it? Let's start at the beginning with you, actually. So tell us why you decided to become a teacher, and if you could let us know what are the kind of degrees and things you do in America to become a teacher, because I think it's different to what we do in Australia.
Sure. So I was way back in my infancy stage. I was born to two performers, so I tried not to do that, and then I ended up doing it, and I ended up going on a children's theater tour after college or university, and I realized that being with the kids meant a lot more to me than being on stage. So I went back to school. So there's plenty of ways to get involved in teaching in the US. So there's, I would say, I think they're all international programs, which would be like Teach for America, which I think is also international. And then there's Teaching Fellows. And then there's also like the going back to school. So I went back to graduate school to get a master's of science and education at Bain Street. And it kind of came out of, I was teaching, I ended up, when I said to the universe I wanted to teach, I got plenty of teaching jobs.
Wow.
And I ended up being a preschool teacher with toddlers, and then with preschoolers teaching swim. And I knew of Bank Street because it was the sort of the ideology of the preschool there. And I'd gone to an infancy institute and fell in love with it. And so in my I think my second year with the toddlers, I started there. And I studied early childhood and childhood, which took me from birth all the way through 6th grade. But I really kind of, as I did 4 different student teaching placements, which was, I went into schools and taught with teachers there in New York. And I really, really enjoyed the early childhood, the youngins. So to teach in private schools, all you really need is like a graduate degree. So I ended up teaching at a Quaker school. I taught kindergarten at a Quaker school, but as I was there, I then got like a certification for public school. So all kinds of different things. And
sounds similar. It's just like degrees here and there, and then all of a sudden we're teachers.
Yeah. And I was very proud of myself. I did the big tests and all kinds of things to get certified in New York. And then the pandemic hit, and we moved to Massachusetts, and my license didn't really come over with me.
Right.
So I ended up, now I've been teaching again in a private school, and I'll be actually moving to another Quaker school in the neighborhood in the fall. So yeah.
Okay, there you go. And so, yeah, so that, wow, there's so much there. So tell me a bit about the philosophy there that you were talking about. I'm really interested in what was specific about that philosophy and the infants and the preschool you were talking about. What kind of teaching, what attracted you to it?
Yeah. So I'm not sure what like the international version of this would be, but it's sort of it's independent progressivism, and sort of following along with like Dewey and a little bit of Montessori in there, and oh gosh, what's the word? Reggio Emilia, which is like the sort of international version. Yeah. So bringing like the outside indoors, and having child-led like curriculum, which I would say lots of schools here try to do and succeed to varying degrees.
Yes. Yeah.
But I would say the preschool I taught at really did have a lot of all of that in it. It had a lot of pieces of Reggio Emilia and a lot of good art, and really helping the student to start to grow and see their own learning.
Yeah, right. And I would imagine your theatre training and your arts education training would have really come to the fore in that sort of environment.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't really see a lot of difference between teaching and theatre. It's just my audience isn't paying to see me.
Well, they kind of are.
They kind of are.
Yeah. Like either through taxes or through. Yeah. Actually, are paying, but yeah, not in the same way.
Not intentionally.
No, and they have to be there.
Yeah, they have to be there.
To let you know if they're not coming. Yeah. That would be the difference. So tell me a little bit more about that, because I think I find the same thing, and I do say that to my students as well, that you really are performing in front of the classroom, and you there is a role you take on when you're in the classroom with students, and definitely my theatre training has helped me be able to be very present in the moment in the classroom, and not bring in outside in with me, but rather really be there in relationship with the students. Yeah. Do you find that too?
I do. It's been something that I've thought a lot about now, having done teaching for like about maybe 6 solid years. I think there's something very exciting about theater education. And I would say that like perhaps in a couple of years I might go back to that, because there's just so much benefit to students doing theater and telling stories.
Yes.
And I get to kind of bring that whole part of me with me. Teaching in the classroom can sometimes be like, sometimes math can be theatrical and sometimes it just can't. Sometimes writing can be theatrical, sometimes it can't. So like, but I would say like, yeah, absolutely. Bringing myself to the work is a big part of it. I think storytelling is a huge part of it. And I've gotten better at bringing storytelling to the forefront.
Yes.
Because it's so important, and kids relate to it so deeply. So.
Yeah. Is arts a formal part of your teaching curriculum in the United States or in Massachusetts?
Somewhat. It kind of depends on where you are and how much funding you have, honestly.
Okay.
But I would say, I mean, I'm not sure how it is in Australia, but it's a little bit spotty. It's kind of depending on where you go, how much of that you get.
Yeah. In Australia, it's mandated so that all schools have to teach at least visual arts and music, and then ideally drama, dance, and media arts. So they have to have some, at least one of those 5. And I would still say it's patchy because in our teaching degrees at university, it's varied how much actual training they will get across the,
Yeah. So for my graduate degree, I was required to take an arts class, but I wouldn't say that that's something that is absolutely necessary in every school like that you find here in America. I don't know that across the board that's something that is always available.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so there you are, trained to be a teacher, ready to go. And then COVID-19 hits. So what happened? Where were you when the pandemic kind of hit America and the world went upside down?
Yeah, well, I got married the day before New York shut down. So that's where I was.
Right. That's right. You had a bit of a Zoom wedding.
Yeah, I did.
But you could have some guests, is that right? To your house?
We did. So we did it at my parents' apartment, and we had a few people, and we were all masked and, trying to keep our distance. And my mom, I'm an only child. My mom was like, "You were the first Zoom wedding." I don't, I probably not, but I think one of the first, maybe.
Yeah.
And so we, it's interesting because now, I guess, being a year away from it, the feeling or the looking back on it feels very similar to me to 9/11, where like,
oh yes,
I saw this like thing coming. Like we shut down in the middle of the week before spring break, just to be safe. We like didn't, and we assumed that we would be gone maybe like a week after spring break. So we sent kids home with everything, and now like looking back at that part is kind of the way that I feel like about the day of 9/11, where it was like there was something going on and we didn't know what was going to happen. And then we taught from home for the entirety of the spring. And the teacher that I was working with was not tech savvy. So I took on a really heavy part of trying to put together like engaging material for kindergartners.
You were teaching kindergartners. So how long were you teaching online for?
Well, I guess it was 3 months. It was the whole of the spring. Yeah. March, April, May, a little bit of June. Yeah.
And how did you work? Were you like online, the whole day, or did they have little activities they could do and then they come online? Like, how did you structure it?
Yeah, that's interesting because even now I'm like, oh wait, how did we do that? So the K team decided to really, there were 3 groups, and so we decided to really like be on the same schedule. And so one of us planned for math, one of us planned for reading, writing, and one of us planned for like a community time. And we would start the morning with them, and then do some groups and like individual, and then give their parents like what to do with them within the afternoon. So it was mostly, I would say, mostly asynchronous stuff. And at the time I was doing a phonics program called Sounds in Motion. So like they would get a video from me doing some sounds in motion, and then they would go do choice time or go do some math. And I think that's how we did it. We were not online, I would say probably the least amount online. The school went up to 12th grade. So they were doing some like full day stuff, but we were not full day.
Yeah. And that must have been a lot of work.
Oh, hello.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. I think, we were not on any kind of platforms like now. The school that I've been with, we were on Seesaw, which is a really early childhood platform. That was not the case. So we sent a lot of digital material and like Google Docs, and it was a lot.
Yeah. How were you through that? What was going on? Was it just survival mode, just doing what you can, or?
I think so. Now, even just like, I love that you're asking these questions, because I don't know that I've actually really thought back to this as deeply.
Yeah.
Because then I was like, the move and the next job, and then, but it was, I mean, I remember when we sent kids home, it was a Tuesday or Wednesday, and I remember like bawling that day, because just putting their things together, because it felt so like there was just, what's the word, like, it was ominous. It was like, more than likely we're not coming back for these kids, right? And like, how do we, I think you were there for this show that I was saying this, that it's like, how do we keep them safe? There's no snow, right?
Yeah.
But I think too, now looking back on it and like realizing that I don't remember a lot of the details, I must have like just been in that mode. Like, I must have just get to the next thing. I remember making the thing that I do remember doing, especially as like the days kind of got a little bit more like, going back and forth, because I had made like a self-care chart for myself, and like every day it was like, did you brush your teeth? Did you get, did you get fully dressed? Did you dance? Did you move? Did you drink water? Very, very basic, just like making sure that I was doing those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like emergency mode for a long period of time.
Yeah. And how were the parents? Because I'm telling you, as a parent, I went nuts. Teacher, and I couldn't handle teaching my kids at home. I was still working too, so the universities didn't. We all went online as well. So I was really struggling with converting drama online, and how do I teach professional practice online, and so that was challenging. And then my kids have experienced anxiety, so they, and I was anxious. I didn't know whether, how long we were going to be shut down for. Was I going to get sick? Was my dad going to get sick? And eventually I just actually contacted the school and said, we're not doing anything. I said, I'll get them to read every day. And we were shut down. Our schools were shut down for like 4 weeks or something. It's like not
okay.
Not that long in New South Wales. So I couldn't even handle that. So how were the parents after 3 months?
Was it, so wait, sorry, did you shut down for 4 weeks and then things like because it was safe enough to come back, or were you going into a break? No, because it was safe enough to come back.
Yeah. Wow. Different states in Australia have different responses and different, so because all our states closed their borders, so we couldn't really freely move between states, so therefore there were kind of different responses by each state. And in New South Wales they were more where I live, where they had kind of and what they would do is kind of a bit of a whack-a-mole thing. So they kind of close certain sections and get all the COVID cases, quarantined and everything. But schools were always open, actually, I have to say. They were always open. So if you had to work, you could send your child to school, but they would be doing online working. People kept their kids at home. But eventually, because of my kids' reaction, I actually ended up sending them to school about 2 days a week. Mm-hmm. I just couldn't. They had begun to really start to affect their mental health, and it just helped them to get out of the house for 2 days. So by the time we had multiple days of 0 COVID cases, then they opened up the schools. I would do things like parents weren't allowed in schools, and in fact still aren't really allowed on school grounds. So it's not kind of back to normal, but certainly, kids are at school and they're there for full days and things.
Yeah. Our parents, I would say, so because of the strength of our K team,
Yeah.
I think the parents were largely very grateful and
Yeah.
largely like just happy that we were like in as consistent as communication as we could be,
Yeah.
and really wanted to like know if we were okay and what they
Yeah, that's great.
I would say coming here over to Massachusetts, and I was in hybrid for most of this year,
Yeah.
going back and forth from week to week, and there were a few students that were online. I would say that the like anxiety was raised at that point, and I can't imagine that would be different in New York as well. I think that like, you know, the longer we were kind of forced, the public schools here and in New York were all closed physically. And I believe in New York, it was that students, and here too, that students with severe needs were able to go in, but same thing, that they were like on a computer most of the day.
Yeah.
But but this setup was hybrid, and it was tough. And I think that as we went on, there was just anxiety, and there was not much to do about it except to like kind of be like, okay, like, yeah, that's true. You know, it's really, really tough. But I think I appreciated most those memes that were like, I've been homeschooling my child now for like an hour, and I think like teachers should get paid $1 million a year.
Yes, yeah.
I don't know. I always sort of fantasize that like teachers are treated really well outside of the US.
Yeah.
I think generally like it is a profession that is tricky to, I think, understand unless you're in it. And so that often gets this, I think, showed a lot of that. The pandemic showed a lot of that.
Yeah. I think maybe the only difference here in Australia, I think we're paid a pretty good wage compared to what you're paid there. So that's the kind of, you know, teachers don't need second jobs here, for instance. They can survive on their wage. But I think other than that, yeah, you know, but definitely the pandemic, wow, so much more appreciative of what they do, and a lot more understanding, definitely.
Yeah. And I can't imagine, I mean, being a parent, trying to, I mean, as a teacher, trying to take somebody else's lesson plans and teach them as my own is tough. Like, I can't imagine as a parent to try to like take lesson plans and be like, well, you know, it's just because it's sort of in a different language, right?
Right. Yeah. I had a friend of mine say that. He was like, why don't they just write it in what is all this language? I think there's a good point there.
It's true.
Yeah. Right. And so when you went hybrid, what was that? Does that mean they were at school? How did that look? So what, some kids would come to school every day, but some would stay at home?
Yeah, so my particular cohort, so I was in New York with Kay and finished out the year all remote, then came out to Cambridge, to Massachusetts, and now teach second grade. And it seemed to me that the school that I had gotten involved with was really safe, and that age was going to be a little bit less tricky to navigate like the online piece, even though for all kids it's tricky, but at least at the very least they like could read to some degree, right?
Yes.
So so there's that. So the way that they had it set up at this school was the pre-K and the K were all in person the whole year, and they only went remote after long breaks. We all went remote for like a week after long breaks to make sure that just in case if anybody was going to travel, that we knew like
right.
So it was every other week we were remote, and then when we were in person for my group, I had 3 kids online. And finishing up the year, I have 1 kid online. So I was teaching in the classroom with 3 kids up on the screen.
Right.
Which is not.
And why was that? Was that because parents were nervous to send their kids to school?
Yeah. And you know, it's one of these things. It's like, if I were a school leader, I might not know what to do also, right? Like I would want parents to be able to make choices for their kids that felt safe and good to them.
Yes.
But I think as we went on in the weeks of going remote and in person and not having as many people in the building, it became very clear that like the model we were in worked and that people were staying safe.
Yeah.
So, you know,
So do you mean that there weren't cases, or so when you said people were safe, that's what you mean? There weren't any transmission?
we actually, out of this whole year, there were maybe 2 cases. They didn't spread, and they were actually students who were remote and not students.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so just one of those things, right? Like you won't know until you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so even for, you know, cases that were sort of within the vicinity or within the community, right? Like it was maybe like a family member. Nothing spread to anybody else. And it was all contained. So I feel that in that way, I feel very lucky. I think the hybrid model was not necessarily the best choice in terms of sustainability for teachers and for students. But.
Yeah. But as you say, so hard. What would you do as a leader? Because, just watching my kids whose mental health struggled, and again, in a very short time, nothing like what you guys experienced. So you'd be balancing that with, some suggestion that kids don't transmit the virus as much as adults. So there's that, but you don't want to have a cluster in your school. You want to put your teachers. I mean, wow. And how did you feel as a teacher coming, and what were you and the other teachers kind of, were there teachers that didn't want to come to school, and how was that handled?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There was a healthy level of anxiety the first, and I would say, honestly, again, like this is all kind of 2020 now, right? Because we're now moving into a place where like restrictions are being lifted and we're feeling okay. So I think I'm like, I'm looking at my husband. I'm like, if he could tell you the kind of anxiety I was under. Yeah, he's nodding his head. It was intense. It was intense. And I think, for a period of time, I was kind of terrified to like eat or take off my mask at all inside, right? Like, because it just seemed so terrifying. Like it just seemed like that was gonna make somebody sick, or me. So it was, I think it was very, very scary. I think it was really, really challenging. And then as we were there longer, the anxiety went down, but I think it wasn't until I got vaccinated to feel better.
Yeah. And so were you teaching him, when you went back to school, were you teaching him masks?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And
you still are?
Mm-hmm.
Kids are wearing masks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even down to pre-K. Everybody.
Wow, really?
Everybody's masked. So that's the other thing too. Again, why like this particular school seemed safe was because we get tested every week.
Okay.
And
so who pays for that? The school?
The school, I think. I know there's a community of parents in the school that are healthcare workers. So I know that they help with like the navigation of all that. Right. But the school has that. We have like air purifiers. We've got like the windows open. This has always been like the measures that they've taken. Yeah. And everybody's masked all day unless we go outside to eat and to play. And we'll take mask breaks every so often. Well, not every so often, enough to help them. But yeah, I mean, all things considered, it was very safe physically.
Yeah, wow. So you're teaching with the windows open in Massachusetts. Isn't it really cold there?
Actually, so here's the thing. I'm a polar bear.
Yeah.
And it's really hot when I teach. So I would say more than likely it was worse for my students who were all like, it's really cold in here. But when it was when it was snowing and stuff, we were advised to only have one open and only have it open a certain amount. And it really was just to have airflow in the classroom. But yeah, no, the cold doesn't bother me as much as maybe it should.
I have to tell you, I'm still gobsmacked by the fact that you're teaching in masks. Because
really,
I'm not saying I don't agree with it. I agree with it, considering the context of America. But just like thinking of the impact of that, because I wear a mask on the train, and I hate it, and it's like half an hour. So I cannot imagine. We haven't been teaching in masks at all in Australia. Yeah.
Wow.
So how's that?
Yeah, it's good that you bring that up, because I think that's the part of it. I've been saying to colleagues this same thing all year, is that there's a piece of teaching that I've been missing all year, and it's very tricky to explain, but it's this part of your face, for me specifically, and for kids, is very expressive. Yeah. And I think as teachers, we often we're reading body language, but we're really reading faces. And I think for kids of that young age, more and more, they're reading our face and we're reading theirs. And without, we can't really give them hugs. We can't do like cuddles. And so the person-to-person like connection and feedback that we would get in a normal year isn't there. And I do feel like that makes the day more draining than it would be. I think that I'm like a Virgo perfectionist human. And so like, I take that on as like, I must be a bad teacher, or I must be like not good at my job. But I think that that's the part of it that's like, I can't control that that's what we're doing. I can't control that we've lost that, and I can't control that at the end of the day, that's why I feel not just like teacher tired, but like human tired. Yeah, it's interesting, because I guess I just assumed all teachers were teaching in masks. That's so interesting.
No, never. Never in New South Wales. I'm trying to think in Victoria, because they had quite a significant outbreak in Australia terms. Well, they closed their schools though, so there might have been a period where they might have taught in masks, but yeah, not very long.
Yeah.
And definitely not in New South Wales. Ever.
Oh, I wish. I'm looking forward to the time when we don't have to wear masks. The kids are completely different when they're like eating lunch, to see their whole face and their whole expression. It's so different. I'm like, you're a different child with all of this going on.
And that's what I think the long-term impact of that, on kids, having those formative years, wearing masks and not getting that relationship with a teacher, particularly as kindergartners, and that's going to have a huge impact. And I think once the world is once the pandemic is under control, I think we're going to have to do a lot of makeup.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, because even here it's completely different, I know that, but we do have a level of social distancing, so there's not the hugging and the in the greeting of people that you're not, like family members, yes, but people that you are not in regular contact with, there's like a pullback, and that's, it has an impact on how you socialize as humans.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm. And when do they think that, do you know what are they waiting for more people to be vaccinated before they get rid of the masks, or what's the sense?
So technically in Massachusetts, the mask restrictions are lifted currently.
Right. Okay.
But I think the problem is like comfortability.
Yes.
And in a school setting, hospitals, like those kinds of places, I think they're more waiting for like public opinion to change, or like the anxiety to be lessened, because I think there are just, I mean, I would assume mostly for parents, but I think just generally, even like if I leave my apartment without a mask on, I just get a little like, and I don't, it's not necessarily because I'm really at that high of a risk. I just think it's been a long time. So I think that in those spaces, the decision is just lagging because we're trying to help, be acclimated.
Yeah. And I think in Australia we have the same thing around our borders. Because our borders are closed. Like, I can't, if I wanted to come see you, Holland, I couldn't. Like, I wouldn't be allowed to leave the country.
Gotcha. Okay.
A permit, and I would say visiting Holland isn't a good enough reason, even though it would be for me. I wouldn't be able to leave the country, and if I came back, I'd have to be in hotel quarantine for 2 weeks.
I see. Okay. So so like there are like larger restrictions, like there are restrictions.
Yeah, it's kind of like half joke, half serious thing going around saying, like Fortress Australia. It's like we're in this, no one's allowed in, no one's allowed out kind of mentality, and people are really reluctant for that to shift, even though I think there's upwards of 30,000-40,000 Australians stranded overseas, not able to get home.
Oh gosh.
Because of the borders closing. People here are like, well, we're safe.
So oh yeah. So
there's that. It's a different, and I think people just aren't willing to give up. Like, we know that our life is somewhat normal. It's not 100% back to normality, but pretty close. And we can see what's happening overseas, and everyone's like, no, I don't want that.
Yeah. I mean, it's understandable. It's been prolonged here.
Yes.
Intensely. So, but yeah, wow, I didn't know that so many people were sort of stranded where they were. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah. It's the different responses around the world are just fascinating. And when you can stand back from it and look, it's the kind of like fascinating and interesting, the mentalities of the different countries and what's come to pass and where we are all now, waiting.
Yeah. We had spoken, my husband and I talked a little bit about at one point, it's like everybody had a different pandemic.
Yes.
Like no matter who you talk to, and it's just wild to me, right? Because it's like, this was something that happened to all of us.
Yes.
That everyone had a different.
Yeah.
No.
And even profession-wise, right? Like if we look at teachers, we had a different pandemic than what other professions did, and completely shifted our whole ability to teach and how we taught, and even just the masks, completely changed. I mean, you do like a lot of like your eyes are kind of teaching,
Yeah.
See a lot of like. Right.
Yeah, and I think a lot too about like food service, and I spoke with and hospital workers, that everyone was experiencing this differently, and I don't know, there's something very strange to me about how I was fortunate to be making money throughout the entire
yes.
in a way that like I was also then active the entire pandemic. I did not really have the like what am I going to do with all of these 300 hours, you know, of time, endless time. And so now it's funny to me because like now I want to like cave. I want to like be in my cave and like do the things that some of my friends who, you know, had their own challenges and their own struggles, but then like learned a new instrument or like read a really cool book, you know, like those kinds of things. It's so I don't know, selfish, I guess, but it's like I kind of want that like inward time that I missed having obviously wanted to be there for students, but I think there's like a little bit of, I don't get that.
I totally get that, because I really felt like, I have a job for life. I had that moment where I was like, I have a job for life. Like even a global pandemic cannot stop my job.
Yeah.
And then also the same is that I wish I had some time off, because my husband is in the music industry, so it just stopped, you know. And so he had just time, well-deserved time, because he works very hard, well-deserved time to just kind of just watch Netflix while I waited for, you know, pubs to open again. And you know, I'm like frantic, you know, come on, teach. Yeah.
And it's such a special part of teaching to me. Like it's like when we decided to move, I was like, you know, well, like teachers are needed everywhere, right? And I feel very like it feels very special to be a part of that like crew of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's then that part of it that's a little bit like, I taught my way through a pandemic. That's a thing that I've done.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I actually think that's really beautiful. You just summed it up so beautifully, Holland. So the only last thing I request, will you sing for us? Because amazing singer, and I asked her to sing and she said yes. So.
It's so funny. So when you said that, I was like, I don't know what to sing. So I went back and forth. There's such a beautiful little piece at the end of that movie, Moana.
Oh yeah.
She sings about like, you know, they've stolen the heart from inside you. And I sing it all the time because it's just so beautiful. But I think, that what actually to me feeds this moment more is is that song When You Believe.
Okay, I've got goosebumps already. So.
Let me see. I'll start the chorus and the bridge. There can be miracles when you believe. Though hope is frail, it's hard to kill. Who knows what miracles you can achieve when you believe, somehow you will. You will when you believe. They don't always happen when you ask. And it's easy to give in to your fear. But when you're blinded by the pain, can't see your way clear through the rain, a small, still, resilient voice says help is very near. Oh, there can be miracles when you believe. Though hope is frail, it's hard to kill. Who knows what miracles you can achieve when you believe, somehow you will. Now you will. You will when you believe. You will when you believe.
Oh my gosh, I can't get that song. Oh, right.
I sang it very low, but you know what? It's late here. So.
Thank you so much, Holland. Thank you for coming on our podcast and giving us insight into teaching in America. I just really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Such a gift. Thank you. And to the rest of you, we will see you next week on another episode of Teaching Heroes. See you then.